Hey there and welcome back to another Miraculous Ladybug Season 4 video. And recently we saw the release of the second half of the Season 4 finale, Part 2 of Shadowmoth's final attack, Strike Back. And that was a wrap on the season itself. And so today, I think I want to run through my thoughts on the season as a whole and come to some sort of consensus as to whether I think it was good or bad, or maybe somewhere in between. So, as you'd know if you're pretty active in the fandom, Season 4 has been controversial to say the least. There have been some very high highs and some very low lows. And because of this, we've seen a lot of people talk about how this season has been trash. How it's butchered characters and had piss poor writing. But is that fair? Is the season really all that bad? Or does it just have a few bad parts? And since most of you did not click this to hear me gush about how good everything was, I'll throw you all a bone and I'll start off with the negatives. And I will also admit that I have been a bit of a detractor of this season in general. It's definitely been a bit up and down for me, so don't worry, I'm not calling you out if you didn't like the show. But that being said, this season in hindsight, in my opinion, was still one of the better seasons, if not the best. But it was crippled by one major problem. The release schedule's dog shit. Seriously, at a certain point, I think it's no longer funny that the show takes, a full-on year to release? Furious Fu was the first episode they aired. And that came out, March 23rd internationally? March 23rd, 2021? And here we are, almost a year on from that date, and we've only just finished the season a week ago. Now, I get that scheduling and working through COVID and outsourcing, it's hard, I get it. But at the same time, this season is probably the first to really try to start to weave the overarching storylines together throughout the episodes, as opposed to mostly being a monster of the week type deal. And this would have been really good if we had episodes released weekly, or just more regularly. I mean, let's look at one of the overwhelming fan criticisms of the season as a whole. Adrian's arc, or lack of arc. Basically, this season, right from the get-go, Cat Noir found himself getting increasingly sidelined by Ladybug, who kept brushing off his concerns and telling him that she knows best because she's the Guardian. And this was initially a pretty interesting storyline. And it was also quite obvious that this was setting up for some big dynamic shift for Season 5. And I mean, you can see that indeed, this was the intention behind the storyline, as it's pretty much directly stated in the closing scene of the finale. But the problem is that since the season ran for almost a year, you have a year of watching one of the main characters essentially become one of the lesser heroes. Yeah, he appears regularly, but never does much, and he felt like comic relief rather than a title character. And so I think this turned people off the storyline almost completely, because they had to wait, and they lost sight of what the purpose of the storyline actually was, and it looked like Cat Noir was just being written like shit for the sake of it. And I'm in two minds about this, if I'm being honest. On one hand, should Asterix and the writers be held accountable for the dogshit release schedule? No, of course not. After all, there are a lot of moving parts to all of this. But there definitely has to be an element of accountability that needs to be observed. Because ultimately, this is Season 4. Season 4! Surely by this point, the creative team understands that there's a higher chance of Jesus himself descending from on high to punch Putin in the face than there is for this show to have a constant release schedule. So that means you need to have storylines that won't age like milk the longer you have to wait between installments. Some storylines can endure under this sort of pressure, but some, like Adrian becoming a side note, do not do well in that same context. And ultimately, that should have been so obvious. They are professional writers. You should not have to wait until the season finale to feel like the storyline was satisfying. Because if the story itself is weak or drawn out, even if the ending is good, I don't think you can justify it, like Asterix has tried to do on Twitter quite a lot. If you're having a 3-course banquet dinner, where the starter is good, but the main course takes too long to come out, and when it does, it tastes like dog vomit, mixed with mold covered in cat urine sauce, you'd probably have a right to complain. And then, if the chef tells you off, saying that you can't judge the food until you've had the dessert as well, well, you'd be pretty upset. And rightfully so, and to me, this is no different. As the saying goes, time is money. And if you feel like a TV show that you enjoy has begun to waste precious hours of your life with an unsatisfying storyline, you have much the same right to complain as if you purchased a bad product. And it's frustrating when people try to hide away from that fact. Anyway though, there are still a few more elements of the season that I think were pretty poorly handled. And a lot of them have to do with the tertiary characters. Characters like Luca and Kagami and Lila. Ugh. But we'll start with our two alternate love interests. At the beginning of the season, we had Marinette and Luca, and Adrian and Kagami in sort of alternate ships for the time being. Everybody knew that they wouldn't last, because that's just obvious from a writing perspective. But that didn't really matter, because we finally had some character development. Until they get dumped in the first 2 episodes of the season, and their role in the story is stripped back quite significantly. So we go from having these 2 pretty unique characters that really do add something to the show with their dynamic with Adrian and Marinette, become really obscure background characters. Like, what? Especially Kagami. At least Luca got a few more episodes to really get highlighted, with Wishmaker and all of that. But Kagami just went MIA this season, and ultimately, it just felt really wasteful, especially since Adrian has done nothing all season. Having her around might have been a good move in hindsight, perhaps? And then we come to Lila. Oh, Lila. I get that people don't like her, right? But she's still a good character, in that she brings something different to the show. All the characters know Chloe sucks. In canon, they all know it and they hate her. But people buy into Lila's shtick. And so, her villain arc has the potential to be something really different and exciting, much like Felix's is. But instead, we've hardly seen her at all. She's done next to nothing, like seriously. I mean, Felix was hardly in this season either, but when he appears, oh my god, it mattered to the storyline. It was big and unforgettable. But here, they introduce this new villainous character in season 1's finale, and then they don't have her do anything until season 2's finale, and then they set her up for big things during season 3, so you would expect that she'd end up with a larger role during season 4, but then she does absolutely nothing during the season, and feels like an afterthought. Just not the greatest way to build up a character who's clearly going to become one of the major villains at some point in the future. It's like, on one hand, they want her to appear and for the audience to care about her, but then they give you no real incentive to do just that. She's just there, and she doesn't matter. And what do we get instead? Why, take a whole arc where Chloe acts as the primary villain, because that hasn't been done before. And then we get another standalone episode in the same season where once again, Chloe is the villain. Perhaps it is time to let Chloe fade into the background for a little while. She is definitely oversaturated and has been drained of any sort of narrative potential at this point. Just leave her be. But I do have a few more critiques of the season as a whole. But these are probably more minor issues. Still, normalizing creeper behavior. No thank you. Marinette is a stalker, and Adrian's a bit of a creep and oozes nice guy vibes. Seriously, this stuff isn't funny. The fans far prefer the wholesome stuff with them, or at least just the cringy, awkward interactions. Not Marinette having a creepy whiteboard and master plan to seduce him, and Adrian having folders and folders worth of photos of his crush, and begging for affection at any opportunity. Yuck. So yeah, the pacing of the writing has been pretty poor this season, which in turn makes even good writing seem slow and plodding, especially when combined with the snail-paced release dates. But then on top of that, you have a lot of character arcs getting bungled and many key characters going MIA. And so from the outset, it seems like the season's been pretty bad from a writing perspective. But I would actually argue that this is not the case. And in fact, season 4 has probably had some of the best writing the show's ever seen. Well, I mean, it certainly advanced from seasons 1 to 3, which were far more basic. I mean, for starters, let's just take a look at how the different story threads have been interwoven throughout the season. We have mini arcs, we have lingering consequences, we have stakes. Characters don't suddenly forget things that happened previously and reset to factory settings at the end of an episode. The writing team has certainly taken steps to add more complexity and more depth to the story itself. Has it always been a resounding success? No, of course not. I've mentioned where it's failed, but there have been successes too, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. This season clearly felt experimental. Like they were trying new things. Did everything stick? No. Not everything is going to work, especially on the first attempt, but I think for the most part, they still did a good job of having both self-contained storylines carried across multiple episodes, whilst also having larger season-spanning storylines. And so I do think we need to acknowledge the fact that the writing has, for the most part, improved. Is it great? No, but it's improved, and that means something to me. And so this ties into the next positive I had about the season. We actually had development in key story arcs. For once, we got some plot progression. Thank God! We had Felix learn about Gabe's identity and end up in a sort of Cold War standoff with him. We had Alia learn that Marinette's Ladybug, and we had Luca learn both Ladybug and Cat Noir's identities. We had a definitive conclusion to the alternate romance storylines, however trash that was, and we had Gabe getting his hands on the Miraculouses and keeping them with him. Thank God he didn't do a Miracle Queen and give them away. So basically, he gives Ladybug the big old middle finger in the process. We also learned who Julika and Luca's dad is, and saw Alec become a better person, because I know everyone cared about his story. And on top of that, we even saw Marinette's family reunite together under one roof, and saw Chloe's half-sister come out of nowhere and join the gang with her own story arc. So that's a lot of development. But even beyond that, while certain characters were wasted, as I've said before, others really shone. Alia got a whole new boost to her character, becoming Ladybug's full-time sidekick and getting a whole lot of screen time and development. We saw Gabe actually have a few rational thoughts that were not smooth-brained in nature. We saw him come up with good plans and actually succeed sometimes, as opposed to his massive failures in the first 3 seasons that left him looking like a pathetic buffoon who struggles to outwit young teens. But of course, the true star of this season is Felix. What a giga chad. He appears in 3 episodes and makes Gabe look like a fool multiple times. He puts Chloe in her place, he busts into Gabe's safe and secret room, he steals all of Ladybug's Miraculouses, and extorts Gabe for the peacock before strolling off into the sunset. Seriously, what a great arc he's had so far. He didn't appear often, but when he did, the writing for him was so good. And really, the whole finale made this season, and was in big part due to how Felix has been written. They actually wrote this villain to be a competent person. He's not an idiot. And honestly, they did the same thing with Gabe this season. He's still a smooth brain, but less. And so whilst the heroes still come out on top most of the time, the villains don't look so pathetic like they used to. So yeah, I get the complaints about the season. I've got my complaints as well. But ultimately, I think the season's been a big step up from what we've had in the past. It had numerous big plot-heavy episodes, big arcs, character development, new heroes, new powers, great plot twists. Yeah, it's not perfect, but ultimately, I think a lot of the complaints have simply been magnified by the long wait between episodes that forces us to stew on each plot point a little too long and lets us perhaps become a bit too toxic. Whilst the season hasn't been perfect, I think the writing's come a long way if you really stop to think about it. But that being said, those were just my opinions. And now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the season? Like it? Hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to leave a comment and let me know.